Continuing our series on Sussex history, I'm visiting possibly one of the most popular and best recognised sites on the South Downs, the Devil's Dyke.
Across here. Whee! Very dangerous. You should always look where you're going. Okay, so as you can see, all across here, this is the Devil's Dyke Valley. And this is where this particular place gets its name from. Now, the importance of this place for me, in a historical sense, is that it's had perpetual use by us as human beings. We've constantly used it. And we find archaeological data going all the way back to the Iron Age, and actually even before then. And the Iron Age archaeological data that we have is ceramics, so pottery, and roundhouses, which are very typical of Bronze Age through to the Iron Age. And the finds themselves have actually been dated from roughly between 100 to about 50 BC. And they would have comprised basically part of the hill fort that was actually built here at that time. And that would have included ramparts as well, which would have had extremely extensive earthworks. So it would have been a huge feat to actually create. But it doesn't end there. If you follow me, and I'll try not to slip over again, this place has always drawn people. People have always come up here. And for the most part, people always try to attach relevance and importance to places. And this site is no exception. So, back in the late 19th and early 20th century, the Victorians and the Edwardians used the site of the Devil's Dyke, not just here, but up on the actual higher points of this part of the South Downs, or up on this hill, to build a fairground and to build a bandstand. And this would have actually been a very popular recreational ground for the Victorians and the Edwardians. And part of, or most actually, most of the things that they built are no longer here. But if you look across the other side of the dike there, you'll see a chunk of concrete sticking out of the side of the valley. What that is are the foundations for a pylon, and there would have been another one on this side here, and there would have been a Victorian/Edwardian cable car, which would have taken people across. So they really invested in this area as a place to come, as a place to spend maybe your days off. And you have to think about it, we're talking roughly around 1897 to about 1909. And a cable car here on the South Downs of all places would have been such a spectacular thing for the time. Now, according to my map here, good old Ordnance Survey map, we obviously have the dike running down in here. And then up here where the trees are, around this area, that's where the hill fort would have been, which is basically the apex of this site. So you can already begin to see that sites like this have immeasurable meaning for us as human beings. Not only is it a defensive site back around 100 BC, but also around the dawn of the 20th century, it's a recreational area. And when you look at the landscape, you can see why it would be good for defence, because we're raised up, we're high up, whilst at the same time you can see why people would come here to spend their time. You only have to look around, people walk their dogs and bring their children here. So it still has that relevance, it still has that importance today. Of course, Sussex is filled with folklore. It's one of its defining characteristics. And of course, the Devil's Dyke is not exempt from that folklore. And the story goes that Sussex was one of the final pagan strongholds of England, and really the last area of Britain to be Christianised and come over to the new faith. And as the story goes, the devil didn't like this. He didn't want the people of Sussex to Christianise. So he hatched a plan to dig a valley from this area all the way to the sea, so he could drown the people of this area. But a little hermit who lived in the hills made a deal with the devil. He said to him, "If you can complete your work in a single night, you can have my soul. But if you don't complete it, you have to go back to hell." The devil said, "Okay, I agree." And the devil began his work. But the hermit also had a plan up his sleeve. In the middle of the night, he took a candle, lit it, and put it in the window. A cockerel saw the candle and thought the sun was about to come up, and so he crowed. And when the devil heard the crowing, he thought the sun was going to come up. So he abandoned his work and smashed his way back down into hell. And in fact, down in the valley is what they've actually marked as the devil's grave. Okay, so what the Victorians and Edwardians also built in the late 19th and early 20th century was a steep grade railway, or a funicular railway, which allows people to travel up a steep gradient. On an engineering level, it's no mean feat. And over the other side here, we'll be able to see the station, or what's left of the station, that was at the top here of the Devil's Dyke, which would have taken you back down onto the northern side of the South Downs to the village of Poynings.
The Iron Age hill fort located here at the Devil's Dyke is what's referred to as univallet, meaning that it is a fortified enclosure of varying shape and size located on a hilltop with extensive earthworks making up its boundaries.
Look at that! It's what's called the Weald. If you look off into the distance, that hill, that's Chanctonbury Ring, another historical and archaeological site. There was actually, I believe, a Roman temple up there, and it's said that when the devil was digging the dyke, as he dug the shovel into the earth and chucked the soil up in the air, the big clumps that landed were what created Chanctonbury Ring and another site which is called Sisbury Ring. Now, it takes my breath away every time I see this site, come rain or shine. It's just, a friend of mine who's from abroad, I brought her up here and she said, "I've never seen so much green in my life." Now, back to the subject at hand. Around here should be the station, or what's left of it, for the funicular railway. Ah, there. There it is. Haha. This is it. Well, this must be it. So, you can obviously see the very heavily worn brickwork, and part of I'm not entirely sure what this would have been here, but this huge iron section may have housed some part of the machinery that actually pulled the actual carriages up and down this hill, and it would have literally gone down this way. In fact, you can even see the ruts here in the landscape, in the hill, that dip. That's where they would have gone, down there. And the people of Poynings, that would obviously have been a place where you could have, I don't know, had a warm drink on a cold day, had a pint of local beer, and then said, right, come on, let's go up to the Devil's Dyke and go up to the fair and the bandstand. Just as we look for attractions today, theme parks, we look for holidays, places to take our children for the weekend, or things like that. This is what this place would have been during that time. Somewhere to come for the day, somewhere to take the fresh air if you came from a major town or city. And you can imagine the lower classes, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure how it would have worked, but you can imagine the lower classes walking up here, and then gentlemen and ladies not wanting to ruin their clothes, or we'll take the funicular railway. But history has a cyclic effect. It has this habit of repeating itself. Like I said, there was an Iron Age hill fort here, and what are forts for? Defence. And then times change. We see this period where it suddenly becomes a place where, like I said, there's a bandstand, there's a fair, it's where people come to enjoy themselves. But, like I said, it's cyclic. And during the Second World War, Canadian troops were stationed here, I believe. And on my previous visits, I've even found some items literally just in the ground, just in the top of the ground. We've got the shell casing and an actual round from a .303 British cartridge, which would have been fired probably from a Lee Enfield rifle, which is what the Canadians used. And on this site, it's in a pretty poor state. There's something from that time, so we'll go and have a look at that now. From my knowledge, the Canadians who were stationed up here, they would have been training up here as well. And I think we often forget, we always, especially these days, we see sort of Canada and America as being not one in the same thing, but more intricately linked than they are with Britain. But Canada was still very much linked to Britain during the war. And this we can see it's up here. It just goes to show that if you look, you'll find. And Sussex is absolutely chock-a-block with history. And a site as small as this, that we can have so many periods all on one spot. It just goes to show how important this actually is as a site. Now, when I was last here, this was off limits. So I don't know if we'll actually be able to go into it, but we'll have a look. It's when you can actually physically reach out and touch history. You make a connection with it. You make a connection with your forebears, your ancestors. You make a connection with an older generation. And when you, just be careful on that, it's quite slippery. And when you come to the places and you're able to reach out and hold it, it doesn't matter if it's thousands of years old or something from 70 or 80 years ago. When we reach out and touch history, we're able to engage with it in a way that you just can't when you just read a book. That's not me saying that books aren't important, because so much of history and archaeology is books and reading. But there's the huge practical element, and especially when something comes out of the ground and you're able to be the first person to have actually held it or touched it in all the time that has transpired, is actually quite a magical feeling. And even when it comes to structures like this, which as far as I'm aware, was for ordnance. It was for explosives and for ammunition. But it doesn't matter. It's all part of the tapestry that makes up the history of nations and human beings. So when you can look at structures like this, and you can look and you can see every little brick, all of those bricks have a history. They were forged in the industries of wartime Britain. Each hand that held each brick that makes up this building was a hand that belonged to a person who could have feared for their families, who may have ended up having to go and fight. The cement mixed by somebody who is long dead. Now let's see if we can get, there we are. This would have probably been some guard hut or such like. And obviously it's filled up now over time. When you look out over landscapes like this, you have these little moments where your mind just goes blank. And it's moments like that when you see the landscape through the same eyes as your ancestors, as your forebears. Anyway, what we're going to do now is head to the town of Hove, which is in that direction, I think, and we're going to Hove Park. And there's something there that I want to show you, which is attributed to the story and the folklore of the Devil's Dyke and his attempts to drown the people of Sussex. It's a crow. The old Celtic legends referred to the crow as the Cailleach, and the Cailleach was a Celtic god, which was this sort of hag-like woman, and she was the god of winter, and crows are said to be her eyes on earth, keeping an eye on things. I think when you begin to understand the folklore and the mythology that surrounds not just Sussex, but surrounds Britain or England as a whole, it's when you actually start to understand its intricate characteristics. It's like in the Slavic world, you know, you have stories of the Baba Yaga, an evil witch that eats people's children. It's that kind of folkish tales that give landscapes like this, it's another edge. We forget actually that landscapes like this can sometimes be quite spooky, but it's the spookiness of the landscape, its rawness, that actually pulls people here. The only problem with making these videos is, considering the time of year, I seem to be spending most of my time cleaning and polishing my boots after we've been filming. Now, I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to be looking for here. Now, bearing in mind I have been to this site a number of times, and I think I know what to look out for. These mounds down in the valley, which are supposedly, according to folklore, the devil's grave. Sometimes people even say that it's the devil and his wife. I never knew he was married. We'll go down this way. Very common sight this time of year. The cows that are brought out here to graze. Oh. Oh, to be in England. Another thing that you will often find around here is, like I've said in previous videos, it's flint. Again, it's one of the primary components, as well as chalk, that make up all of this landscape around here. I'm just trying to put some distance between myself and cows. It doesn't even have to be history for us to find the beauty of this landscape. Even something simple like a farmer with his cows. It's part of the story of this whole area. And I wonder, over the hundreds, even thousands of years that have transpired, how many stories have gone untold. How many things have happened here that we'll never know about. And here, I talked about the cable car that ran across here. This is a huge chunk of hardcore that would have made up part of that. In fact, there's quite a few chunks of it around. Some more here. This is brickwork. I'm not actually entirely sure what how the cable car came to an end, but it was roughly around 1909, 1910. They may well have demolished it, but I'm not entirely sure. Iron, or steel, sorry. So, from the research I've done, we're looking for a mound or two mounds that are going to be sticking up out of the landscape. Apparently they're quite prominent, and if my research is correct, there should be just around the bend here. Whilst looking for the Devil's Grave, it just dawned on me, I haven't even mentioned how this valley has come into being. So it's a result of a number of different geological factors, but one of them is river erosion, which has actually created this, and that was done over 14,000 years ago, which just goes to show we're literally walking through a rut in history, a historical crack in the landscape. Now, I think I can see it, that mound just there. I've built it up and it's going to be completely a complete anticlimax. And this is it. We have this one here, and we have another one just over there. You sometimes wonder how folkish tales come about. You often wonder who was the first person to say that this was the grave of the devil and the grave of his wife. It seems quite, I should say, actually pretty unspectacular. But I don't think I'd want to be here on my own at night. And when we think about how folkish tales emerge, there's always a huge calling from the darkness. That seems to be one of the primary components behind folklore and folkish tales. They're always warnings to the curious and warnings to people who might hold life cheap. Cautionary tales. If indeed the devil is buried here, I think he can stay here.
Travelling to the town of Hove, you are confronted by this, the Goldstone, now located in Hove Park. It sat for many years on farmland in Goldstone Bottom, but in the early 19th century, a theory was put forward that it may in fact be a sacred stone of the Druids. The Druids were part of the high-ranking priestly class in ancient Celtic cultures, with the earliest detailed descriptions of them coming from Julius Caesar's Commentari de Bello Gallico from around 50 BCE. So the story goes that whilst the devil was digging the valley to drown the Christians of Sussex, he hit his toe on this rock and in a fit of rage kicked it, where it eventually landed here in the Goldstone Valley. You might be wondering, why is it called the Goldstone? Well, that's because on a geological level, there are very, very small traces of gold actually in the stone. Though don't think that by coming down here and chipping bits of rock off, you're going to find anything. They're ever so small, just literally trace elements. Anyway, thank you for tuning in again to Agora Historica. If you like the video, click the like button and please consider subscribing. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.